Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 841. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we are back from our adventure and our trips down memory lane, at least for a bit. Today, we feature our interview with Gorkem Ercan. We discussed open source, leadership, and learning. By the way, if you have a career in software, this podcast has a ton of great advice from somebody who's in the trenches and practical, both leads by example and leads organizations. Gorkem is a founding distinguished engineer and CTO of Jozu. Gorkem has experience working and leading teams with various technologies across a wide spectrum. He is an avid contributor and supporter of open source, something that he highly recommends as a career booster. He's a creator of the wildly popular Eclipse JDT language server and vscode-java extension, as well as the YAML Language server and vscode-yaml extension. He is a contributor on various projects, including Eclipse Che, Eclipse Theia, and Apache Cordova. He is a member of the Eclipse Architecture Council and one of the longest-serving Eclipse committers. Are you ready to talk learning and open source? It's time for the interview. Gorkem Ercan, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks for having me.
This is great. Before we got on, people know that I probably chat for a while with people, and we talked about Toronto and other things. It's a pleasure to have you today to talk through. Why don't we start with, something sort of relatively simple. You've been involved in the open source community, both in terms of working and, doing commits on projects and with companies like Red Hat for a long time. Has being involved in open source actually been helpful to your career?
Yeah, it has. I think it has identified how my career developed over the years. I mean, I first started getting involved with open source very early, like right out of university. Of course, at that time, you were just learning the things. So I was reading code more than writing code at the time on open source. You're following up how things are working and then trying to figure out how to contribute. But that's more of a if you can find a problem that is small enough, then you can contribute. But the first thing that happened is when I was working with a company that was a network provider, a GSM, a mobile network provider. Mm-hmm. My team was using Java EE at the time.
Okay.
And there weren't too many Java EE tools out there at the time. It's like the IBM had a very complete one, and then I think that was it. So, and we kind of started developing some tools for ourselves. Well, I started doing that with a friend of mine to get the team working a bit quicker, so that they can debug code and so on and so forth. We added an editor, we added something generator, and this is all happening on top of Eclipse IDE, which was the most modular one and open source one at the time, right? So, and then it reached to a certain degree of usefulness, and we said, well, let's put this out. So I think that's the thing that actually changed everything for me, because we put it out and now people started using, and then we ended up open sourcing it, and it ended up being part of the Eclipse Web Tools project. So, and the career moves that I have done afterwards were always influenced by somewhat my involvement with open source. Like when I moved to Nokia, Nokia was actually doing an open source project, so they were actually looking for someone who was experienced with open source. When I moved to Red Hat, it happened so that I actually got interviewed by the person who knew my code from Eclipse, because like he recognized my name. He couldn't take the two and two together until like we started talking, but he recognized my name. It's like he kept saying from the first minute, it's like, I recognize your name. I recognize your name. And then I said, oh yeah, I was involved with WTP. And then it was like, oh, that's where I know you from. We actually took your code and then created our stuff from, as an example, from your code. That's where I know you from. It's like, okay. So it always played a role in my career. The practices is always solid, whether you're doing open source or not.
Is that where you really got, well, or did that help you develop as an engineer such that you really were able to hone your skills on top of what you were doing, in your day job?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think it gives you a different sense of quality when you're doing open source, right? You see that very often when someone is doing their first contribution to open source, because it's someone else, like it's the world that's going to look into their code. They get like a little bit anxious about it. I think there's a part of that always. So when you are doing open source, there's no such thing as perfect code, of course, but when you're doing open source, you're more conscious about it. You're more anxious about, your code being open to the world. And I guess that kind of is a forcing factor for you to strive for better. I think that has been the case for me, at least early in my career. And when you mid-career or late in your career, then it becomes a different kind of forcing factor. Now you're actually trying to work with the community. That means, creating interfaces, abstractions, not in the means of creating unuseful abstractions, but creating interfaces that the community can extend and contribute to and adopt, right? It's like that changes your view on how to architecture things, where you want to keep it simple but also extensible as well. So, those aspects of, someone who is just coming into the project needs to be able to continue and contribute and use this project, right? It's you don't have that usually in a company closed source project where, the newcomer may actually get a month of, depending on the company, of orientation to the code and the project. Whereas in an open source project, you're basically just putting the code out there and instructions and hoping that they can actually contribute and use your project. So it becomes a different set of concerns that you try to address. And at the end of the day, the practices that comes with it is actually good practices for any kind of project, whether that's open or closed.
So do you see this as an available path for engineers to hone their practice and hone their skills today? Or is that something that's sort of, it was, and now it's a lot more difficult to have an impact and to actually hone your skills doing it?
Actually, I think it is more so.
Wow.
Than in the past.
Mm-hmm.
There is plenty of open source software out there. It's like at Red Hat, we always thought that, when you have Microsoft doing Linux servers, we always thought that, this has changed. We have changed the world, right? So I think open source is so ubiquitous right now in any company, anywhere. And people usually start with open source. Some of their projects, some of the products actually start from open source today, that I think it's more so. But I think, and this is still, the jury is still out on that, is with the AI, I think it's going to be more and more important for younger generation of software developers to get involved with the open source projects. the reason for that is with AI, some of the early career tasks can be automated. Like I do it myself as well. It's like, I don't need to get something written for, I don't know, reading CSV files or something, because that's code that can be generated, and 99% of the time the code will be okay and encapsulated enough. And so you're actually missing out these sort of tasks in closed source projects. But open source projects have plenty of those, and you get to read and understand code. That's very important, because you need to understand the code to be able to contribute to it. Whether you get assistance from AI or not, that doesn't matter. You actually need to understand it, because otherwise your contribution, you won't be able to contribute. Like, if you don't know how the I/O for the application that you're trying to contribute to, if you don't understand that, you don't know how that works, then you cannot really make any changes to that is involving that application practically, right? Or you will do them, but it will come to a maintainer, and the maintainer will just shut it down because they know how their code works. So for the early career newcomers to the field, I think that's a good place to start and learn, because those learning opportunities, in my opinion, is going to get less and less in closed source company environments.
I ask because I think it's an interesting conundrum, but I also ask because I have two nephews that are just getting started in the world that we live in. Is that what are you seeing that kind of disconnect at early people, as they enter the marketplace?
Unfortunately, yeah, I do.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, unfortunately, right? It is. It just depends on the company a lot, where whether they're adopting AI in that sense or not, and how they are adopting it. But the more and more I see experienced developers getting more productive, but on the other hand, early career developers are missing out some of the opportunities that they would actually have. And part of it is AI, maybe some part of it maybe co-location is less frequent now as well. But I personally think that AI is playing a lot more role than the co-location now.
Interesting. It's an exciting time to be in the business. I mean, well,
it is.
I'm probably a tad bit older than you, so I remember once upon a lifetime ago when I first started coding, and my elders looked at me and said, "You don't understand. You can't get as close to the iron as we can." Even though I was an assembler programmer, it's like, well, just because I don't do machine language, I still do assembler. Oh well, never. We all go through this, and I think there's different levels of learning, and you have to get through something to actually make it. Let's switch gears slightly and talk about DevOps and machine learning and AI these days. What's the relationship? AI, ML. It's still relatively early in its progress.
Yeah.
Does DevOps play a role in that area?
Yeah, it does. At least we believe so. So the way that AI and ML has been developed so far, and the way that that most people think about AI and ML is, and this is probably due to because it's just so new, is it's like a separate thing. It's like, oh, here is AI and ML, and then we need to do ML ops or LLM ops or AI ops to be able to use this. And that is partially true because the AI and ML applications, or AI and ML, have different and more challenging flow than your regular applications. And part of it is because of the way that the regular applications are. They are more deterministic. Once you put the source code and the same compiler parameters, the binary you're going to get is going to be the same, right? Well, that's not always the case with AI, right? And as the data changes, the results of your AI changes, and so on and so forth. So it's a completely more complicated, more workflow that you need to accommodate for with the AI ML. However, if you accommodate for that only within the AI and ML context and not within your larger DevOps context, what you're doing is you're never able to diffuse AI and ML into your existing applications, into your existing solution. And I don't think there is a world out there that the AI and ML is going to be a completely new solution where we actually ignore every other solution that we have in the world. So it means that the AI and ML solutions needs to diffuse into the systems we have today. And the way to do that is not like we cannot really move everything from our existing the systems to ML ops or LLM ops or whatever ops, AI ops, but rather get the AI and ML systems and the sum of the practices of ML ops to work better with DevOps practices. So yeah, it is important. I think the companies who will be very successful with AI and ML will start to recognize that they need to actually integrate the AI and ML into their applications, and as part of that, into their existing DevOps cycles. They need to improve the existing DevOps cycles. They need to come up with solutions that are compatible with their DevOps cycles, and that's how they will be able to utilize and benefit from AI and ML.
Just for an example, what does that look like? What is merging those two or integrating those two or maybe even more than two, flows together look like?
I mean, we started a project called GitOps.ml, right? And when we started before we started the project, we were trying to do some AI and ML ourselves as part of our company. And one of the things that we are very good at is DevOps, right? We had a lot of DevOps experience coming in into the company. So our DevOps practices was, I would say, the best you can do at the moment. And one thing that we realized is with all those practices that we even you try to do the perfect DevOps pipelines and DevOps practices, when you start to take in AI and ML into those, anything that comes from that world was not really compatible. Like a good example, and the problem that we tried to solve was, we had these containers, image containers that we were generating, which we were deploying to production, and we had SPaMs and provenance and attestation for all of them. So we knew in every container what software we have exactly. And at any point, we could just say, oh, here's a CVE, let's update this, right? But when AI and ML comes in, there are no SPaMs. You don't know where it is coming from. You don't know what the data set was for training it. Even if when you do, you need to go and trace the leniency on a third system and so on and so forth. And even worse, most of the people actually just put their AI and ML weights into S3 buckets, which is, it has some sort of a access control, but it's not really an integrated access control to the rest of your system. And, we were trying to optimize on that, and we kind of built the first version of GitOps.ml by doing that. And we said, okay, how about we take these models and data sets out of S3 buckets and put them into OCI registries, like the Docker registries? Can we actually do that? Can we actually rewrite them as OCI artifacts? And that actually turned out to be a very easy task for us to do. So we first did that, and then we started putting our models and data sets and code essentially into OCI registries. Then it gives us a very consistent versioning and very consistent history of the data sets and the models, because now we can associate the data set with the model, with the code, and they are immutable. So if you make a single character change, you're actually getting a new version, and that's also there. And from there, we were able to say, oh, okay, now I can sign this, right? I can sign this. Now I can do attestations and provenance because I can attach SPaMCAST to this, because all that tooling that we actually had for container images in the past that was working as part of our DevOps platform is now working for the AI and ML artifacts too. Because now we can do SPaMCAST, we can do signing, we can do verification of these packages. So they're like tampering, checking for tampering. It just became a function of your DevOps pipeline rather than you trying to implement something specific to AI and ML artifacts, right? So that was the idea. And we, after a while, we said, okay, yeah, this sounds like a useful thing to everyone. So we open sourced it. And that's how the GitOps.ml project has started.
Where do you see it going at this point?
You mean the DevOps or the GitOps.ml?
Let's start with GitOps.ml and then maybe take it to the macro level of DevOps.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the GitOps.ml is started as a solution to solve the data versioning and the model versioning problem. I think it is based on a standard. It is itself an open standard. So I would love to see it become more adopted and hopefully, become the way to store AI and ML models and data sets. There are SPaMCAST standards that are being developed. Actually, that has been released this summer as well. So there are SPaMCAST standards that are coming in. So I think those are using them with model kits or the GitOps.ml is going to make a lot of difference. So for me, I think this is a very simple solution that solves the attestation provenance problem for model kits. And it is not a new solution. It is a solution that has been solving this problem for regular applications using container images. So I do not see a lot of friction on that. I'm hoping that it becomes more and more of an adopted practice for AI and ML.
Shifting gears a little bit as we close in on about 20 to 30 minutes, as a leader, as a CTO of an organization, how, from being both the distinguished engineer and CTO, how do you shape the culture at Jozu?
Well, I guess it depends a lot on the character of the person. I have always been a proponent or leading by doing. So I would, it's like I would actually do the things that I expect my team to do. I would actually be the first one to come up with those practices and say, this is how we should act, and I will act like that, right? So I wouldn't be the person who says, do the right thing, but don't do what I do. Yeah. So I don't think that's an advice that works. So I think leading by doing is my go-to leadership principle. Therefore, I'll do that. Of course, yeah. I mean, I think that's my first principle on that.
And I buy that. It's, walking the talk is very powerful. As an executive, as a CTO, isn't it harder to be leading by example?
It is. And as the organizations get larger and larger, it becomes even more challenging. So it becomes harder I think it's not harder to actually do the right thing. It's harder to communicate that you're doing the right thing. Because as the organization becomes larger, the people who actually have access to or observe your behavior daily goes smaller, right? So you're still doing the right thing, and you may actually still be doing the code reviews right, and so on and so forth. But the amount of code reviews you're able to do is very small, and the number of people who are actually observing that is smaller. So yeah, it becomes a harder way to lead. Yes, but I have been an IC leader throughout my career, so it has been very rare for me to be able to say, "Let's do it this way," and that is taken as the rule of the land. But therefore, I am more tuned for influencing rather than ordering people around, I suppose.
I'm glad you brought it back around that way, because that's where I was going to take that follow-on question as to whether or not the involvement in the open source and those kinds of communities actually has had an influence on not only obviously the culture around you, but how you deal and work with people. So it was good that you brought that back up.
Yeah, I think so, yes, because especially with large projects, you will not have access to people's to-do lists.
Yeah.
So you can't really put anything to anyone's to-do list. You can't actually remove anything from anyone's to-do list. So it's going to be more about influence rather than being able to tell people.
I think the world that we live in now, where not co-located, there's so much more distribution, makes the whole idea of influence much more important. And again, that's one of the reasons I wanted to start with the open source stuff is to highlight how all of these things tie together and can work with people all the way into the executive ranks.
And one of the other things that is often missed with the open source is open source actually teaches you to give initiative to people as well, because there will be an area of the software that you're not really essentially interested in, but it is important to someone else. And they will come into the project and say, hey, you know what? I want to actually take care of it. And in open source world, that's like, sure, show me the code, do the work, and we'll talk. So, but and you can have guiding principles and what you think about the solution, and have that conversation in the open source as well. But with a closed source solution, I guess that is a much harder conversation for someone to come into a project and say, you know what, I like markdowns. I want to support markdowns in your software. And that's not always a positive outcome.
No. This has been fantastic. Gorkem, before we start to wrap, if you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you your caffeinated beverage of choice and a magic wand and gave you 2 wishes and said that you could solve any 2 things impacting DevOps in the world now, what would those 2 things be and why?
Any 2 things.
Things.
That's a very generous wand.
You just can't. The only thing that you can't ask for is 2 more wishes on top.
All righty. I guess the first one would be, in the DevOps world, would be a standardized workflow format, right? Like there are numerous CI and CD tools out there, and none of them actually are compatible with each other. And there are like 99 different ways of expressing your workflow. Like okay, it's actually there are, let's say, 99 different CI/CD tools, and there are probably 300 different ways of expressing your workflows because one is never enough. So I think it would be awesome if there was just one thing that you can do and it works for anywhere. And the second one is would be to be able to run workflows with 100% accuracy locally when you're developing them. That would be a life-changing experience for all the DevOps engineers.
I bet. Gorkem, this has been absolutely marvelous. How would people continue the conversation? How would they find out about you?
So yeah, we have an open source project in gitops.ml. Anyone who wants to contribute is more than welcome. We do have information on the website, how you can contribute, how you can join our Discord channel for discussions. Essentially, our company is Jozu, jozu.com, and anyone is welcome to ping us. We do have our contact information on our website. And if you want to just give the model kits and the GitOps ML a try, we do have a registry full of model kits in jozu.ml, which is our free registry for anyone who wants to give the model kits a try.
Super. Gorkem Ercan, this has been marvelous. Is there anything else that you'd like to promote before we go?
Oh, no, I think that was plenty.
All right. Again, yeah, this is the most fun I've had in a while. We get to get both technical, talk a little high level. Excellent. So thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Master your work intake. It's been a year since J. Ross Publishing published Mastering Work Intake. Hope you've bought your copy already. Jeremy Willits and I believe our book and workshops have helped numerous organizations, teams, and most importantly, people bring order out of chaos. At least that's what they've told us. As the year winds down, we're excited to offer a free 30-minute office hour session with us. We'll facilitate the session to help you create a plan to tackle your work intake challenges. Book time with us, link in the show notes. We look forward to the conversations. Also, consider buying your boss a copy of Mastering Work Intake. Your work-life balance will approve and probably improve. In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 11 on Death and Suicide begins Part 3 of Massimo Pigalucci's How to Be a Stoic. Buy a copy, read along. Link in the show notes. Death and suicide are not popular conversation topics at the lunch table, even during the worst project. However, as I read this chapter for a second time, I considered the topic from two directions, which helped me extract ideas from the chapter that make the topic less likely to clear the table. Link in the show notes to this week's installment of Reread Saturday and all previous in this series. Next, in the SPaMCAST 842, we will feature our essay on how to recognize if you have a work intake problem. Over the past year, it has become apparent that the symptoms sometimes obscure the root cause. We will also have a visit from the one and the only Susan Parente. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?